Greetings, friends. You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today, June 25th, 2026, we'll break down the situation in the world and on the front. The day turned out to be extremely eventful, so let me ask you right away. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. YouTube actively suppresses the reach of military analytical content, and without your subscription and engagement, a significant share of viewers simply won't see our briefings. With that said, let's get started. We'll begin with the political bloc, and today brought a truly loud statement. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio weighed in on several fronts at once, on Iran, on Russia, and on the so-called Anchorage understandings. And here's the key point. According to Rubio, no Anchorage agreements ever actually existed. Let me remind you that almost exactly a year ago in Alaska, in the city of Anchorage, a historic meeting took place between the presidents of Russia and the United States. Ever since, the Kremlin, the Foreign Ministry, and the Russian leaders' inner circle spoke literally every single day about the spirit of Anchorage and the understanding supposedly reached there. Now, however, the American side is effectively saying that neither the agreements nor that spirit ever existed. The natural question is, why wasn't this said earlier? As of the time this material was prepared, there has been no official reaction from Moscow, not from the president, not from the foreign ministry, and not from the presidential aide on international affairs. In parallel, signals are also coming from European politicians. The German chancellor today called for halting hostilities along the current line of contact and sitting down at the negotiating table. In other words, Berlin has openly begun talking about a negotiations track, and Washington, at the same time, is distancing itself from the Anchorage understandings that the public never actually got to see. The cherry on top, so to speak, was a publication by the Financial Times. According to the outlet, strikes deep into Russian territory against oil refineries are being carried out with the full support of American intelligence, and possibly even with the personal approval of US President Donald Trump. Let me stress, this is the outlet's own claim, and it should be treated with that source caveat in mind. But it lands against the backdrop of a very real energy and fuel crisis, and the impression forms that the American side has already calculated the situation several moves ahead. Another information strike against Ukraine today is more psychological in nature. Reports are coming in that certain hackers managed to gain access to Ukrainian servers and download data on AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, losses since the start of the conflict, down to itemized name lists. These figures were published. We will not be naming them, especially since there is no independent confirmation yet. But if the data is verified, it will be one more sign that by the midpoint of the 5th year of the war, both sides have reached serious exhaustion, at least when it comes to the losses of the Ukrainian side. Now to the mutual strikes. On the night of June 25th, the Ukrainian side, according to various sources, deployed no fewer than 330 drones for strikes deep into Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry reported in the morning that 245 drones had been shot down. Strikes were recorded against Krasnodar Krai, in the area of the settlement of Poltavskaya, where, judging by the footage, the target was an oil depot or fuel storage facility. A fire broke out there. Note that strikes increasingly land specifically on Krasnodar Krai, a territory that serves as a fuel donor for Crimea. This partly explains the worsening fuel crisis on the peninsula. There were also reports of a strike on the refinery in Ufa, but with high probability, this raid was repelled by air defenses. The smoke in the footage was apparently produced by drones shot down on the approach, and even if the plant did take any damage, it was minimal. The Russian side, for its part, used only 91 drones overnight, noticeably below the average daily figures and very far from a massed strike. The last genuinely massed raid was on the night of June 15th, and by simple arithmetic, an impressive stockpile of drones has accumulated since then, one that is not yet being put into action. By contrast, over the past day, a record number of fuel stations were hit along the entire line of contact. In Kherson, a gas station in the city center was completely destroyed. Near Nikopol, a strike by several drones burned out a station in the northern part of town. But Zaporizhzhia is especially telling. Here the Ukrainian playbook essentially mirrors what is being done against Crimea. The city is being isolated. Over the past day, several gas stations were destroyed in the southern and central parts of Zaporizhzhia. At one of them, a fuel tanker was apparently unloading at the moment of the strike, which set off a powerful fire. In the western part of the city, where industrial zones and heavy truck lots are concentrated, the strikes hit clusters of trucks and tractor-trailers. The published footage shows dozens of destroyed vehicles. And this is already the third day in a row that Zaporizhzhia's truck fleet has been taking serious losses. An important detail, these strikes against tractor-trailers coincide in timing with the Ukrainian strikes on Crimea and on Crimean logistics. In all likelihood, the Russian side is deliberately targeting trucks, on the assumption that it is precisely these tractor units that are being used to launch drones deep into Russia. And tellingly, throughout all this time, the Ukrainian side has never provided any convincing compilation of footage of the launches themselves. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has officially shown nothing of the sort. Fresh satellite imagery of the Zaporizhzhia bridges has also appeared. The craters from Russian glide bombs are now clearly visible on it. The strikes are being aimed at the foundations of the bridges, not at the spans over the Dnipro, and for now the accuracy, frankly, leaves much to be desired, though over time it will likely improve. The overall picture shapes up as follows. The destruction of gas stations and the strikes on bridges and energy infrastructure indicate that Russia is preparing to isolate the eastern and island parts of Zaporizhzhia ahead of possible fighting for the city. Judging by the geography, the Russian side will try to avoid turning Zaporizhzhia into another Kostiantynivka or Bakhmut. It's also worth addressing the Kinburn Spit separately. Today, pro-Ukrainian resources are massively circulating a video in which a Ukrainian flag has been planted on the ruins of one of the buildings. The location was geolocated, but there are no Ukrainian troops, no infantry of any kind nearby. In the assessment of a number of experts, the flag was simply dropped from a drone and fixed to the roof. The spit is regularly churned up by artillery. There is nowhere to take cover, and pro-Ukrainian sources had earlier reported a withdrawal of Russian units deeper into Kherson region. But even if that is the case, neither side is in a position to hold the spit. Today it is more of a grey zone, under full control of FPV drones, and a landing there is out of the question for the Ukrainian side. Against the backdrop of the fuel crisis in Crimea, this whole flag story looks like one element of a large information campaign aimed at pressuring Russia into negotiations along the line of contact. Now let's move directly to the corrections along the line of contact, from south to north. The Zaporizhzhia front has been static for weeks now, so we'll start with Donbas. The Kostiantynivka Sloviansk agglomeration. The Russian Defense Ministry has issued a new report. Russian units managed to advance through several more dozen buildings, and this is reflected on the maps. According to the latest corrections, around 97% of Kostiantynivka is already under Russian control. Only the Chervony and Novoselivka micro-districts remain with the Ukrainian side, where AFU forces are clinging mainly to industrial zones as well as to fortified positions in the local school and boarding school. Meanwhile, part of the forces in the central part of the city has been cut off by the Krivyi Torets River. The narrow neck of land is swept by drones, and getting out of there is now practically impossible. The battle for the city is approaching its conclusion. In the meantime, the Ukrainian side is reinforcing Druzhkivka, moving in personnel, equipment and weapons to hold the town for as long as possible. Gradually, Druzhkivka too is turning into a ghost town. Further north, fighting continues along the Mykolaiivka-Lyman line. On the eastern Sloviansk axis, the Russian army has improved its positions in the area of large forest tracts, and judging by incoming information, AFU forces have pulled back to Mykolaiivka, trying to organize a defense there. Two strongpoints serve as anchors, a block of high-rises on the southeastern outskirts, surrounded by forest and dacha plots, and the Sloviansk thermal power plant. A powerful strike was delivered against the plant today. Footage has appeared showing it burning after the morning hits. Mykolaiivka is the last town shielding Sloviansk from the east, and Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are essentially the two capitals of the remaining AFU-controlled Donbas, so its loss would be a heavy blow for the Ukrainian side. On the Lyman sector, the Russian side is advancing. In the central part of the town, something like a cauldron has formed. Several hundred AFU fighters have been blocked in, and the single bottleneck is swept by drones. Supply for the encircled groups runs solely via drones, and the Russian side is striking the supply vehicles. One of them led Russian units toward positions near the railway station, where separate Ukrainian groups are still holding out. There is also fighting for the southern part of Lyman. One more clarification, from the Kryva Luka area. Russian units managed to clear the tree lines west of Kaleniki and cut off the pocket between Rai Oleksandrivka and Kryva Luka, gradually closing in on that same Mykolaiivka, the Kupiansk-Oskil sector. Here the Russian army is pushing AFU forces back from the Oskil River. The offensive on Kolodiazin continues, one of the largest settlements in the northeast of Kharkiv region. It is being approached from the east, from the direction of Dvorichanske. Further south, there is fighting for Petro-Ivanivka. From the north, Russian units have already entered the village. The goal is to cut off this entire part of Kharkiv region and move toward Veliki Burluk. There are no major cities here apart from the already taken Vovchansk, and the AFU has little to hold on to. Kupiansk itself remains the main problem. Both Russian and Ukrainian forces have been bogged down here for over a year. Right now there is fighting for Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi, Kovsharivka, and Novusinova. The Russian side is trying first to clear the left bank of the Oskil. We move into Kharkiv region. Fighting continues for Kozacha Lopan, currently in its northern part. On the Vovchansk bridgehead, Russian forces have crossed the Staritsia River and entered a large forest tract, trying to filter through it from the north toward Rubizhin. At the same time, there is progress in the built-up area of Losivka, which may soon pass fully under Russian control. Separately, about the large Kharkiv forest in the Rubizhin area. This tract sits on a strategic height on the Ukrainian bank of the Siversky Donets in the direction of the northeastern outskirts of Kharkiv. The first buildings of the city are roughly 27 kilometers from here. According to fairly reliable data, the Russian army has managed to break through the AFU defense here and dig in on the northern fringes of the forest. If the tract is fully traversed, then under the cover of the trees, it will be possible to mass forces ahead of possible fighting for Kharkiv, shielding units from FPV drones. This is one of the key forest tracts of the entire Kharkiv offensive. Now, the Sumy axis, and here, by a number of assessments, the situation for the AFU is shaping up to be harder than the maps suggest. The main event is north of Sumy itself. As a reminder, north of the regional center stretches a large forest tract, which the Russian army had long been trying to reach, in order to advance toward the city under the cover of the greenery with fewer losses. Today this succeeded. The AFU defensive line on this sector failed to hold. The settlement of Ivolzhanska passed under Russian control, and units began filtering into the forest to the south. In parallel, Russian troops are approaching Pizarivka from the north and have entered the village of Novosich, where fighting has flared up. East of Sumy, the main fighting is in the Myropilya area. The forests south of the earlier captured Zaporizhzhia have been cleared, and the front has been straightened along the Pazel River. The pocket between Ryazny and Taratutyne was also cut off, with a large complex of farm buildings and hangars north of Ryazny cleared, a site the AFU had clung to for quite a while. To the north, in the area of Komarivka and Bobilivka, the North Seva grouping is gradually closing in on Ulanove, a large settlement and an important defensive node. In addition, missile and aerial bomb strikes are being delivered against AFU positions east of Sumy. Through many months of small bite advances, a wide buffer zone has already been formed along the entire border in Sumy region, which is precisely why a repeat of the Sudzha scenario here is highly unlikely. And note a curious detail. Local residents of Sumy are increasingly asking why the authorities still haven't declared an evacuation of the city, even though, by their accounts, the Russian army is already practically at its gates. Possibly, against the backdrop of talk about potential negotiations, the Ukrainian side simply doesn't want to stir up panic prematurely. And finally, the Borderlands, Chernihiv region. Today, the Ukrainian authorities announced a forced evacuation of 12 border villages at once. As a reminder, Chernihiv region borders both Belarus's Homel region and Russia's Bryansk region simultaneously. Slated for evacuation are Kamin, Kamyanska Sloboda, Vorobivka, Chaykine, Karabani, Hazo-Providne, Oleksandrivka, Shishkivka, Rudnia, Prybin, Moshchenka, and Lemeshivka. And these are not small border hamlets long since cleared out, but villages up to 10 kilometers from the border. The activity in the borderlands allows for two explanations. The first, in Kiev there are serious fears that Russia will launch an offensive toward Chernihiv and form a buffer zone, as in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. The second, less likely one, an attempt to provoke Belarus into being drawn into the conflict in order to force Russia to pull off reserves. Let me recall the recent episode with Zelensky's ultimatum. The Ukrainian side claimed that Belarus had set up relay transmitters along the border, helping to guide strikes against Ukraine, and demanded that the equipment be dismantled within a week, threatening strikes against Belarusian refineries. Minsk did not respond and withdrew nothing, and today Zelensky declared that the relay transmitters had supposedly already been torn down and the demands met, even though their very existence was never confirmed by the side in Minsk. Exactly how the situation in the borderlands will develop is an open question, and I invite you to discuss it in the comments. In the rest of Donbas, as well as in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, no significant changes were recorded over the past day. That is how the situation on the front looks as of the close of June 25th. Thank you for staying with the channel. If this breakdown was useful to you, support it with a like and a subscription. It genuinely helps the channel push through the algorithms. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. This was Ruslan Belov. Until next time. Until.